I am Colby Sumner, and this is America, Fog of War.
Pride of our nation, this day have set upon a mighty endeavor, the struggle to preserve our republic. Men's souls will be shaken with the violences of
The cost of freedom is always high, but Americans have always paid it. And one path we shall never choose, and that is the path of surrender.
I can hear you. I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you. And the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us.
We're told that on his body was found a diary. Under the heading, My Pledge, he had written these words: America must win this war. Therefore, I will work, I will save, I will sacrifice, I will endure.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for another Hippocket History episode. As always, I'm joined by my co-host Brett Thomas. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great, man. I love being here every single time.
Oh man, I did too. It's a good time. We're very lucky to get to do this.
Yeah.
This is
Agreed.
we got it made in the shade, man. This is a
Well-
good way to spend our time and talking about warriors and doing cool things.
What's nice about this episode is, maybe I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, but this was the first battlefield that we went to together
It is.
after many years of not seeing each other.
Yeah.
We
And
met here.
And we had an awesome time. It's, in my opinion, I live in the Gettysburg area. Obviously, Gettysburg and Antietam are beautiful battlefields, and they're preserved very well. But for whatever reason, and I don't know why, Manassas is the prettiest of them all to me, dude. It's just the coolest looking place, dude. Especially when you're there. If you're there like around the time of the battle, because we went in August, right? August is when we went.
August, yeah.
And it was just something else to see, but it was freaking hot.
It was hot. And, yeah, very hot.
Well, if you haven't guessed already, we're going to be talking about the first Battle of Manassas, or the first Battle of Bull Run. Super excited because this is the first major battle of the Civil War that we're finally getting to talk about, and
Yes.
I'm excited to get into this. I'm going to kind of set the stage for everybody. I know I go over this briefly in the narrative episodes, but just to kind of give you a little bit of a setup and understand what we're going with here, I quote somebody that I'm going to later talk about in this episode. He becomes a big part, at least, of the Confederate story throughout the war. But this person is going to have something to say as to what all these plans and the way this battle shapes up is based off of. And it goes, quote, "The first of all maxims for the conduct of a campaign is to oppose fractions of the enemy's army with the whole unit of your own. In other words, compel the enemy to divide while you unite and strike him divided. Or, as our general, Nathan Bedford Forrest, put it in plain Confederate vernacular, get there first with the most men, or get there firstest with the mostest."
I like that one better.
It definitely, I don't know, it's very, very country folksy sounding, the latter. But one thing to say real quick, just to kind of make the point, we try to do this show from the perspective of the Union forces solely because we're an American history podcast, right? American war history podcast. So that being said, our focus is on the U.S. government's troops. We are going to, in this battle and many of the other battles that we're going to talk about throughout this war, though, have to talk about things from the perspective of the Confederate soldiers as well. And when we do, it's never to praise like what they're fighting for. It's just militarily, we're analyzing the tactics and the strategy and the actions that were taken on the battlefield, or in some kind of relation to the actions on the battlefield, to highlight them for the story and to learn from. So just know that as we go forward, when we talk about these guys like Nathan Bedford Forrest, it's not to praise them. It's to praise maybe their military actions, but never their personal or moral actions outside of the battlefield, if that makes sense.
I agree with you there because a lot of people, of course, in every time and every part of American history, people are a product of their time. And so what was happening in our nation then certainly has to be viewed from either both sides. But looking at it from the American side, that's where we're coming from. But like anything, it takes two to tango.
Exactly. So, needless to say, let's get back to this. So, to set the stage, what this person I quoted just a second ago was talking about is something that Napoleon actually made famous, and it's known today as defeating an army in detail, or defeating your enemy in detail. And the idea again is to, if you have a larger force that you're facing, to try to catch them when they're separated, right? Because large armies don't move together usually. They usually split up and will meet in a location so that they can travel, quicker and easier down these roads. We're going to talk about that actually with this very battle. But you try to attack the enemy as they're broken up, as they're separated, or doing this, that, or the other with your whole force, so that you now have the superior numbers and you have, an advantage on your side. Well, that's what this person was talking about. And that's what really both sides are trying to do, essentially, right? Both sides of this battle are trying to do that. The northern side is sitting in Washington, D.C., and they're also sitting just across the Potomac River from northern Virginia and West Virginia today. And they're looking southwards at two Confederate armies, right? So the two Confederate armies to the south are going to be the Army of the Potomac, which not to be confused with the Union Army of the Potomac that will come up later. This is early in the war, so these army names will change here shortly after this battle, and they'll become what we're more used to hearing from the Civil War armies and Civil War stories. But you get the Army of the Potomac, which is stationed down in Manassas Junction, and that's going to have about roughly 20,000 men, and they're going to be under the command of General P.G.T. Beauregard. That's the same guy from Fort Sumter. He's here. He's in charge of a 20,000-man force. And then to his west, over in the Shenandoah Valley, is going to be the Army of the Shenandoah, and that's going to be commanded by General Joseph Johnston. Now, north of them, the Confederates are looking at two Union armies. The Union Army that's stationed in Washington, D.C. is going to be the Army of Northeastern Virginia, and they're going to have roughly around 35,000 men. And then the Union force that is north of the Potomac River, out further west, kind of north of the Shenandoah Valley, over by Harper's Ferry and that area, that's going to be the Military Department of Pennsylvania, and they're going to have roughly 15,000 men. Now, the Military Department of Pennsylvania is going to be under the command of a aging Major General Robert Patterson. He's been in the military for quite a while, and he doesn't really do what he's supposed to do. Patterson is supposed to keep Johnston's army, the Army of the Shenandoah, occupied there in the Shenandoah Valley. If he's able to do that, then the Army of Northeastern Virginia, who is under the command of General Irvin McDowell, that 35,000-man force in D.C., he will have the opportunity to travel south down to Manassas Junction and engage with the Army of the Potomac there and have the superior forces, right? He'll have a pretty substantial advantage in his favor. Needless to say, Patterson doesn't do that. Although he is going to wire back that he did do that, he's not going to.
That's nice.
Right. So he's moves real slow. I was reading about it. He crosses the Potomac. He gets to Harper's Ferry. He realizes Johnston's men are no longer there. They've pulled back a little further into the valley. Then he decides to pull back across the other side of the river to the north, like back to Northern Territory, and doesn't move again from there. It takes forever. I mean, General Winfield Scott is going to have to tell him multiple times to cross the river, to do this, to do that, and the other, to send him troops so that McDowell has the forces he needs. But really, the guy doesn't execute. Needless to say, this call for 75,000 volunteers that Lincoln did, and then the follow-on call for more troops after that, they've only got 3 months, of an enlistment, and that time is very quickly approaching, right? So in just a few days, the army's going to be gone. This big Union army that they have massed is going to it's going to dissipate.
Yeah, 3 months comes out of nowhere.
Well, it goes by real quick. And Lincoln knows he's got to do something with these troops. McDowell knows the same thing. And they're going to actually have a conversation back and forth. McDowell's going to be talking about, talking to Lincoln about getting into some kind of battle with the Confederate forces. And McDowell's going to make the complaint that all his men are so brand new, like they're green. And Lincoln's going to say something to the effect of, yeah, you're green, but they're the enemy are also green too. You're both green alike. So it's going to buff out,
Yeah.
Like, you guys are all brand new. We need to take care of this. So needless to say, that Army of the Shenandoah, with the roughly 11,000-man force under Johnston, is going to hop on a train and reinforce General Beauregard there at Manassas Junction. This is an interesting thing because that's the first time in history that troops are transported on railroads or train cars on railroads to resupply, or not resupply, to reinforce forces on the front line for
That's
battle.
really neat and interesting for two reasons, I think. Because one, you got infantry now with transportation. There's nothing better than being in the infantry knowing you don't got to step it out. And now they got trains. That's cool.
As long as you don't have to take the M2 boot anywhere and you can get a ride, that's a good day.
Every time. Now, the second interesting thing about that is, like you said prior, is that a lot of things are going to change after this battle. And something we see in history and all major wartime in any country is that a lot of changes are made very rapidly during wartime. So some of the changes and some of the things that we're going to see, like trains transporting troops, it's an incredible achievement.
Yeah,
very fast.
The weaponry, the transportation, the medical field, right? Like
it explodes.
Like when you talk about triage and how they treat wounded soldiers on the battlefield and how they get them back to a hospital.
Yeah.
All that is going to be just revolutionized during this war. It's really interesting to watch. When I was taking a class one semester on 20th century history, and the Industrial Revolution is like the big thing in the 20th century, right? You got World War I and into World War II, all this, on and on and on and on and on. And I was having an interesting conversation with the professor of that class, and I was making the argument to him that, well, really, like, yeah, you say the Industrial Revolution kind of starts in the 20th century, but honestly, the Civil War in the mid-19th century seems to be the point where you really start getting the introduction of that Industrial Revolution, because it shows itself everywhere. And we were talking in relation to to wars and battle. We were talking about World War I and how much that changed from World War I to World War II and so on. But the things that you see in World War I, you're going to begin to start seeing in this war. I mean, not to the point that you have tanks and stuff, but there's going to be a lot of innovations made that directly apply themselves to the advancement and technological progression of many industries, not just warfare. That being said, though, that's kind of how things are set up. So just to picture, you've got Joseph Johnston's force coming from the Shenandoah Valley off in the west. They're coming east to Manassas Junction to reinforce Beauregard. And then you've got Irvin McDowell coming out of Washington, D.C., moving south to attack those forces there. Now, he again is under the impression that he's only facing a 20,000-man force. He doesn't know Johnston has, by this point, reinforced Beauregard, so he's kind of walking in a little blindly.
Right. So as the march to Centerville, coming in blindly, General McDowell, he's approaching, and this is going to take off July 16th. So a few days before the battle, they got the first day's march, a short 5 miles, beginning at 2 in the afternoon.
It's a late time to start a march, isn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I don't know, 2 a.m.? I guess that doesn't sound much better either, but still.
Yeah, but you know how it is.
way.
You know how it is, dude. Like on long, like on hike days. You remember having to get to the base, like, well, you were married, you lived off base. I remember having to wake up and be ready to go at like 3 a.m. You have your pack downstairs, like staged and ready. You remember this?
Yeah, I'd be running around in the dark looking for you guys.
Right, carrying a big, heavy backpack.
I'd be pulling up, grab this thing out of my trunk, and go find you guys because you're already outside somewhere.
And usually you always start early. That's for a multitude of reasons. But one primarily, especially in these months, is because it gets freaking hot the minute the sun starts to come up. You're trying to get You're trying to get the majority of your walking done when it's still dark,
Yeah, so here these guys are in probably the hottest part of the day. Let's start at 2 and go on through the afternoon.
And those dirt roads, it was dusty, man. Oh, bad.
Yeah, so, but as they move along, very light opposition from Confederates, maybe not even a skirmish, like a pot shot here and there as they approach or see someone along the way. But the following day on the 17th, this is a full day of marching for these guys. So largely, the advance of McDowell's army is plagued by troops that have no experience at all. They're very hot and dry conditions, a lack of effective cavalry, and nobody's really scouting. These guys are just kind of moving along as
blindly
they possibly
walking
can.
into it. Also, I read many accounts of the slinky effect, bro.
Yeah, the slinky effect. These guys probably just have their heads down, just marching, just moving. No idea what they're about to get into, And yeah, that slinky
The
effect.
slinky
is probably
effect. So
just
for anybody that
horrendous.
doesn't know what we're talking about, because I'm sure even like people that were in the military, I'm sure. Do you love America Fog of War and want more of it? If so, Brett and I would love it if you became a member of the America Fog of War Patreon. Visit americafogofwar.com and follow the link Become a Member located in the menu at the top of the homepage and pick from one of our 3 membership subscription options. As a member, you can enjoy ad-free early access to all of our free episodes, like this one, as well as gain access to not 1, but 2 extra episodes a month, and join either Brett or myself on a monthly Zoom call where you can help us make decisions pertaining to future episodes of America Fog of War, discuss war movies and books, and talk about some of your favorite American battles and campaigns, Hippocket class style. Your membership subscriptions are what enable us to bring you the content you love every month. Help us grow this podcast and become part of the team today at americafogofwar.com.